Thank you very much. The first thing I want to do is to recognize a person who I obviously think has been the best First Lady of the Commonwealth, my wife Jane, who's with me tonight. Would you please give her a welcome? Thank God I didn't have to follow Greg Stumbo. Senator Williams, you mentioned the Ark, and you didn't think you'd get an invitation. But you will. After all, we're going to need somebody to clean out the bottom of that thing every so often. I was given a note as I came up from Dave Atkinson. It says, Governor, Senator Williams didn't call us chamber light tonight. Could you get him to run for governor every year? It is great to be here with you. This Chamber Day is a great event, and it is a demonstration of just how important this organization has become to the people of this Commonwealth. From my days as a member of this state board, I've recognized how blessed Kentucky is to have business leaders like you come together as a state chamber, people who care deeply about issues, people who are well versed on those issues, people who aren't afraid to stand up and propose solutions to some real tough problems. I've been working with many of you for 3 years now on issues ranging from education to creating jobs. And in the session ahead and the year ahead, I'll continue to building the partnerships that have allowed us to make progress together on a number of fronts. And I want to personally acknowledge the leadership of this organization and ask you to give a round of applause to Dave Atkinson for the great job he does in leading the Kentucky State Chamber. David, thank you. You know, this recession has caused economic stress all across the spectrum. But my friends, we are steadily turning this situation around. We must maintain this momentum by continuing to focus not just on the short-term strategies that have helped our businesses and our families survive this historic recession, but by also focusing on long-term changes that will increase our ability to compete in the 21st century. Strengthening our workforce, improving our business climate, improving our collective health, creating jobs, and leading the way on energy initiatives. Many of these issues we've focused on now for 3 years, and we'll continue to focus on them as priorities in 2011. And on the top of the list, jobs. There is nothing more important to a Kentuckian today than a job. Creating jobs, and just as importantly, retaining the jobs that we already have. I'm very proud of the fact that in the summer of 2009, in a special session, I proposed and the legislature joined with me to pass laws that revamped our tools for recruiting businesses and helping existing businesses expand. And folks, it's working. Listen to this. Since then, 223 companies have received preliminary approval for one or more of the new or expanded economic incentives that law created. Those 223 economic development projects represent over $2 billion in new investment in Kentucky. That's just in the last 17 months. They represent the potential of the creation of 13,500 new jobs, plus retaining nearly 4,800 existing jobs. Recently, we announced 2 initiatives that will help even further. The Kentucky Export Initiative. This initiative will bring together leading international trade organizations to educate small and medium-sized businesses about the impact of exporting. It'll provide companies with identification of new markets. It'll identify potential distributors and agents and end users, and assist with compliance, logistics, and legal questions. There is a whole new world of markets out here for Kentucky business that most Kentucky businesses, particularly small and medium-sized businesses, don't really even know about. This initiative will help us grow our economy and grow our jobs. The second initiative, the Kentucky Small Business Investment Credit Program, is geared toward businesses with fewer than 50 employees. It provides a state income tax credit ranging from $3,500 to $25,000 to businesses that create, fill, and maintain one or more new eligible jobs while investing at least $5,000 in qualifying equipment or technology. Because of all of those efforts, folks outside of Kentucky are beginning to take notice. For instance, the economic consulting firm Moody's Economy.com, they predict that Kentucky will experience a higher percentage job growth in the coming year than all but 4 states. Forbes magazine, you all know that they do rankings of the best places to do business. They just came out with their 5th annual set of rankings. The Commonwealth improved just in 1 year, in 2010, by 12 places. And finally, listen to this. Some folks complain, and I think I just heard some complaints about our tax system, about how it is just so horrible and that Kentucky is falling farther behind, we're not competitive, and how Tennessee is so wonderful. Now, I didn't hear that from you, Greg. Well, I know all of you have heard of the National Tax Foundation. You actually saw it up here on the screen a few minutes ago. In October, they did their annual rankings of states. Kentucky's business tax climate is ranked 19th best in the entire country, up an incredible 15 spots since 2009. We're ahead of neighbors, Illinois, Ohio, West Virginia, and guess what? Tennessee. We're 19th in terms of the best tax climate. Tennessee's 27th. Obviously, we need to continue to improve the tax climate here in Kentucky. But I'm pretty darn proud of how far we've come in the last 3 years. When we have moved up like we have, when we have become as competitive as we have, when we are creating 13,500 new jobs and keeping 4,800 existing jobs, when we're attracting over $2 billion of new investment in this Commonwealth, that's something that we can all be proud of. Because I didn't do that all by myself. I proposed that legislation, but the legislature had to come together and pass it. And that legislature was made up of both Democrats and Republicans. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again. When we run for these offices, and you'll see it this year, obviously, you'll see all the partisan speeches and the like. That's our system. That's the way we run elections. But the people of this state expect us, when elections are over with, to be Kentuckians first and Democrats or Republicans second. And my friends, that's the way that I have governed. And that's the way that I will continue to govern. I could care less whether the idea comes from a Republican or from a Democrat. If it's a good idea, we need to come together and make it into law. Quite honestly, and I know it's going to be an election year, but quite honestly, here we are, moved up all those places. We all did that. We did it together, and we all ought to be proud of it. We have made some great strides. Are we out of this recession? Of course not. We've still got way too many people out of work. And I won't be satisfied until we get every one of our people back to work. And we're going to work 24/7 to make that happen. But all of these rankings are independent approvals of the strategic and the sound approaches that we've taken to address our revenue problems. Approaches carefully implemented to limit future damage to our economy. We must maintain and improve the competitive tax climate that we now have. So in this session, and during this recession, I want to repeat a pledge that I made and that I will continue to make. I am not going to support any broad-based tax increase on anybody. Neither families nor businesses need an additional burden right now as we are fighting our way out of the worst recession of our lifetimes. I'm also going to continue to support Kentucky's signature industries, like the equine industry. And I appreciate the state chamber standing up and taking a tough stand in favor of expanded gaming in this state. And it is time that all of our leadership come together and finally acknowledge that we need to do that to save a signature industry, the equine industry in Kentucky, and most importantly, to save 100,000 jobs that depend upon that industry. We're going to continue to support the tourism industry, the bourbon industry. I really appreciated the reception out there. I saw several of my friends who were making sure that another signature industry was doing fine. And we appreciate you for that. Last year, we hosted the All-Tech FEI World Equestrian Games. What an amazing event. What an amazing event. We all ought to be proud of that. We were on stage for millions and millions of people all over this world. 500,000 of them came from all over the world to right here in Kentucky. And I'll tell you what, Kentucky shined. Kentucky put on its best face, and we outdid anybody else that's ever put on the World Games anywhere in the world. This coming July, because I introduced some legislation and the legislature came together with me, worked on it, and we passed it, we're going to have the first ever NASCAR Sprint Cup Series race right up here at Kentucky Speedway. Economists predict that 1 week, folks, think about this. I mean, we talk about the big blue nation. There's also a big NASCAR nation, apparently, because that 1 week is going to be about $150 million of positive economic impact to the Commonwealth of Kentucky. We have a lot going on. But for businesses to succeed long term, we need and must have an educated workforce. And a top priority in this coming session is another issue on which we agree, and that is reducing Kentucky's dropout rate by raising the compulsory school attendance to age 18. Simply put, our youth need more education to succeed, not less. This isn't just an education issue. It's a jobs issue. It's an employment issue. You've seen the figures. On average, dropouts earn about $6,800 less a year than high school graduates. That gap is even larger if the person goes to college. It is simply unacceptable. It's unacceptable that we allow so many teens to walk away from our school system with no plan for their future. Increasing the legal dropout age is just part of a broader effort that includes the First Lady's Graduate Kentucky Initiative. We just held the last of 7 regional seminars designed to understand why students drop out and how communities can address that problem. Last year, The House of Representatives passed this bill overwhelmingly, 94-6, in a clear bipartisan vote. But Senate leadership killed that bill by not allowing the Senate to even vote on it. You remember when Moses went into the Pharaoh and he looked him in the eye and he said, "Let my people go." Well, Senate leadership, it's time to let this bill go. Let it be on the floor, and I will guarantee you it will pass overwhelmingly with a bipartisan support. Each moment we waste is another group of students that we fail. I also recently received recommendations from a task force I created to ensure that children entering kindergarten are mentally and physically ready to do the work required of them to succeed as they move through the educational system. We must and we will align our early childhood education and health care providers around a common definition and goal of kindergarten readiness. Likewise, the Transforming Education in Kentucky initiative is organizing and strengthening various efforts to ensure readiness at a different level. Too often, when students leave high school, they're not ready either for college or for our workforce. And once students enter college, we want their experience to be efficient and effective. So last year, we proposed and together we passed and signed a bill to make it easier for students to transfer from our 2-year institutions to our 4-year institutions. Lord knows it costs enough now to send a kid to college. And we need to make that an efficient system where they can get out in 4 years, get a degree, and go to work in our job market. You know, in this economic climate, Kentucky obviously cannot invest a lot of new money into education because we don't have it. But that doesn't mean that we retreat. I've worked hard to preserve K through 12 funding during this recession. In fact, as you've heard, we balanced the budget 8 times. And each time, I made education the top priority. The General Assembly agreed with me. And because of that, we did not cut and have not cut one dime out of that basic funding formula that funds classroom teaching. And during this recession, that is one heck of an accomplishment. In the area of higher education, we're going to continue to support allowing universities to issue their own revenue bonds to finance building projects that will generate income needed to pay off those bonds. We can safeguard the state's bond rating, while at the same time allowing our schools to carry out and expand on the missions that they have to educate our kids. Now, another priority this session is protecting and improving our delivery of health care to Kentucky families. We've heard some talk about the Medicaid program, and it is a difficult program because during this recession, folks, let me just give you some numbers real quick. Before this recession hit us, we were putting 800 to 900 new people on the rolls every month. During the middle of this recession, we were putting 3,500 people a month on the Medicaid rolls. And we hadn't expanded the eligibility. These were simply people who had lost their jobs, who never thought in a moment that they would either be on unemployment or on the Medicaid program, but who found themselves able to take advantage of those programs because they were out of work. So it is a big problem. But I've got some good news for you. First, the bad news. This coming year, this year we're in now, we've got about $142, $150 million deficit in the Medicaid budget. And if that hole isn't filled, we'll have to cut about $600 million in services by July 1st. That's because that $145 to $50 million is state funds, and you match it with 80% federal funds. That, of course, not only would hurt our families if you took $600 million out of the program, it would also hurt our economy because that money goes to the providers out here, it goes to hospitals, it goes to nursing homes, it goes to doctors, it goes to pharmacists. And so taking $600 million out of that economy at this point would be pretty tough sledding. The good news is we've got a plan that will solve that problem. But the even better news is that it is a plan that not only will solve that problem, but it is going to reform the way that we deliver Medicaid services in Kentucky. Short term, we're going to move some money from the 2012 budget to 2011 to cover that shortfall. But yesterday, we issued 7 or 8 RFIs, requests for information, out to the private sector. I am going to call on the private sector to come in with their expertise and their knowledge and their technology and help me run the Medicaid program in a cost-efficient manner. The private sector knows a lot more about running these kinds of health programs than we do. And that expertise will be essential in controlling health care cost. By doing that, actually it's heading toward a managed care model for Kentucky. It's been tried in other states. It's worked in other states. Right now, most of our program is a fee-for-service program. What that means in simple terms is that a doctor gets paid every time a patient goes in. A hospital gets paid every time a patient goes in. Every time you have a procedure, you get paid. There is no incentive to keep a person well. There is no incentive to have individual responsibility for yourself. By moving to a managed care model, we will be looking at providers and saying, okay, here's the amount of money you get this year. There's your population that you're going to serve. You manage them. You work with them. You keep them out of the hospitals. You work with them in wellness programs. You encourage them to take personal responsibility for themselves. And by managing care in that way, we will be able to save a lot of cost in our Medicaid program, and I think the private sector will help us do just that. Other things that we've already done in Medicaid include reducing fraud and abuse, reducing unnecessary use of medical services, treatments, and ER visits, and we've begun to better manage pharmacy costs. And at the same time, we've taken aggressive steps to address fundamental problems in Kentucky that increase health care costs. These include implementing a Journey to Wellness program for state employees, the same thing I'm talking about doing now for the whole Medicaid program. It emphasizes personal responsibility. It rewards people for staying healthy. Another thing that I think is very important long term that we've done, and I think Dave Atkinson mentioned it in his remarks, we ramped up a program to help smokers who want to quit, including authorizing Medicaid coverage for nicotine replacement therapy products and tobacco cessation medications. I'm not sure there's anything that causes us more health problems in Kentucky than the heavy smoking that our people do. And we need to attack that problem on a number of fronts. I congratulate the Chamber again on taking another tough position a couple of years ago and going with me to get an increase in the cigarette tax. Because that, when coupled with what the federal government did, really started causing some reduction in smoking among adults and among teenagers. We've been improving dental care in poor regions in Kentucky. We've got some pretty tough dental problems all over Kentucky. We were able to cobble together some grants, including from ARC, and put pilot dental programs for children into eastern Kentucky in the ARC counties. We've been tracking down 50,000 kids in low-income families who qualify for the K-CHIP program, for the health insurance program, but just weren't in it. And we found about 50,000 so far and enrolled them. In the long term, a healthy child is going to learn, and a learning child is going to have a better probability of success as they get out of school. Another issue that we've worked on together is energy, and I've heard some talk about energy up here tonight. 2 years ago, I put forth a comprehensive energy plan that relied on several principles. The central principle was support of our coal industry as a resource and an economic driver in this state. And I'm going to tell you something. Washington, D.C. is giving us fits right now with our coal industry. And we have worked in partnership with the coal industry and with the regulators trying to work through those issues. But finally, after the arbitrary and unreasonable decisions that the EPA continued to make, the state of Kentucky has stepped up and sued the EPA to get these permits moving so that our miners and our coal companies can mine coal, employ 18,000 people in a clean way, and continue Kentucky being the energy capital of the world in terms of coal. One last issue that I want to talk with you about, and I think it's an issue on which we agree. And other than jobs, it's the main issue that has allowed us to get through this recession better than most states. Fiscal responsibility. Some people talk about cutting government. In Kentucky, over the last 3 years, we've actually done it. In Washington, when you need more money, you just turn the printing press on again. Thank goodness we can't do that in Kentucky. We have to live within our means, and we have to pass balanced budgets. In Kentucky, we balanced our budgets 8 times in the 3 years I've been governor. All told, we've cut over $1 billion in spending out of our budgets. We now have the smallest executive branch workforce in decades. We're cutting $5 million in non-merit employees out of that workforce. We're furloughing employees for 6 days, just like many of you have had to do in the private sector. Those furloughs, I don't think they included the legislature, but those furloughs included my staff, my cabinet, and myself. Some of us, including myself, are even taking voluntary 10% pay cuts. Now, we know that is not going to balance the budget. But you know, if I'm asking those state employees to sacrifice in the way that we are, I feel like it's part of my responsibility to share that sacrifice with them. And so we're applying all of these measures to ourselves, as well as to the state employee out there working very hard. In the governor's office, we now have 3 people doing 6 of the most important jobs in state government. In essence, doubling up the work and saving 3 salaries. My budget director also is secretary of my cabinet. My chief of staff is also my chief legislative liaison. My policy director is also my communications director. Folks, that's serious efficiency, but I know you know what I'm talking about, because you've had to do the same thing in the private sector. We've simply applied the knowledge that I gained in 20 years in the private sector to state government in terms of becoming more efficient and saving dollars. We don't have one single person in the governor's office who is assigned a take-home vehicle. Not one. We've also taken steps to shore up our public pension funds, reducing benefits for new employees, requiring investment expertise on boards that make those decisions. Like families and CEOs all across this state, we've looked at all of our expenses, and we've learned to do more with less, and we've learned by having the courage to make tough decisions. Consequently, we haven't had to make some of the drastic, catastrophic decisions that other states have made. Listen to this for just a minute. When you hear people running down the Commonwealth as not being competitive, when you hear people saying what terrible shape we're in, listen to this. New Jersey last May laid off 3,000 teachers. Virginia cut $700 million from K through 12 education in the current biennium. I heard Georgia mentioned a few minutes ago. They just cut $403 million out of education. Hawaii cut its school calendar last year by 17 days and furloughed teachers for every one of those days. Michigan reduced student financial aid by over 60%. New York cut funding to community colleges by 11%. South Carolina cut funding for its juvenile justice program by nearly 25%. So anytime you get feeling sorry for yourself, do what I do. Just drive across our state line for about a day. When you come back home, you're going to feel a lot better about Kentucky. Because in Kentucky, while we've cut over $1 billion in spending, we protected our priorities. We protected education. We protected public safety. We protected health care for the most vulnerable. And we have worked every day on job creation and making our spending more efficient. Along with stronger ethical standards and websites that let the public see how our tax dollars are spent, we're continuing to transform government. Now, we could hunker down and hide and wait for things to improve. But folks, that's not the Kentucky way, and that's not the Steve Beshear way. Kentucky cannot afford to emerge from this recession shell-shocked and shattered. Instead, we have to emerge from this recession ambitious and energized. We cannot and will not use this recession as an excuse not to make Kentucky a better place to work and to live and to raise a family. We've come a long way. We still have a ways to go. But you've been with me every step of that way, and I appreciate your support. I appreciate your ideas. I appreciate your commitment. Most of all, I want to thank you for being there for Kentucky and for Kentuckians.